In September 2017, Liam Harper, 29, and Daniel Brooks, 30, vanished without a trace on a challenging trail in Yosemite National Park. For 5 years, both were presumed dead, victims of an accident, a sudden flash flood, or swept away into wilderness areas where no one would find them. But in July 2022, a man walked into a small store in Tuolumne Meadows, alive but unrecognizable. What he told police when he was finally able to speak shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Where had he been for those 5 years? And what really happened to Daniel Brooks? Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On an early September morning in Yosemite National Park, the early sunlight poured over the Happy Isles trailhead, signaling a dry and busy day on the Mist Trail. The route hundreds of visitors choose to admire the famous waterfalls of the valley, but for Liam Harper, 29, and Daniel Brooks, 30, this morning marked the start of a planned day hike, before all traces of them disappeared completely. According to information the family provided to park rangers, both had moderate hiking experience and had a specific plan, starting from Happy Isles, following the Mist Trail past Vernal Fall and Nevada Fall, then reaching Little Yosemite Valley before heading back in the afternoon. Cameras at the Happy Isles entrance recorded them entering in the morning, each carrying a light day pack with water, snacks, and a thin jacket. Basic items for a day trip. The ranger at the checkpoint recalled that they appeared relaxed and confident as they headed onto the busy trail. They stopped briefly at the Vernal Fall footbridge to rest before continuing up toward Nevada Fall, where the view opens up to the entire valley below. In the early afternoon, another group of hikers saw them standing near the Nevada Fall overlook, with Liam looking at a paper map while Daniel pointed out the route ahead toward Little Yosemite Valley. That was the last time anyone saw them. By late afternoon, the weather suddenly turned bad, with thick fog and strong winds from the east, making the Mist Trail slippery and increasingly empty. As the sun set, Liam and Daniel did not return to camp as planned, which was completely out of character for such a carefully prepared itinerary. Both of their phones lost signal throughout the night, with no messages or calls sent out. The next morning, their car was still parked untouched at the Happy Isles lot, showing no signs of having been moved. Unable to reach the two men, and knowing they had never changed plans without notifying anyone, the family immediately reported them missing to Yosemite law enforcement. As soon as the report was received, Yosemite law enforcement opened an official missing persons case and began implementing the initial steps of the park's emergency search protocol. Information from the entrance cameras, departure time, planned route, and statements from the last group of hikers who saw them was compiled into initial data to define the search area. Based on the pair's intended movement, the search team decided to activate SAR Phase 1 that same morning, focusing on the main route from Happy Isles to Vernal Fall to Nevada Fall. Ranger teams were divided by section, starting from the base of the Mist Trail and gradually climbing higher. One group hiked quickly along the trail, observing and calling out over loudspeakers to elicit a response if the victims were nearby. Along steep sections, rangers checked trail edges and areas near the falls, where slips and falls are common for less experienced hikers. Familiar rest spots like the Vernal Fall footbridge, the slippery rocks below the falls, and the Panorama Trail junction were thoroughly searched, as these were locations where Liam and Daniel had been confirmed to have been the previous day. Meanwhile, a park helicopter was dispatched from Tuolumne Meadows to scan the area from above, focusing on clearings among tree clusters along the Merced River and slopes prone to sliding. Infrared cameras on the helicopter aided observation, but effectiveness was limited by the thick fog still clinging to Yosemite's eastern slopes from the previous night. From the ground, rangers used whistles and handheld loudspeakers to send sound signals in all directions, following protocol to give victims a chance to respond if trapped in low-visibility areas. However, there was no reply. The search team continued expanding the area to all spots hikers commonly visit, overlooks, sections with strong water flow near Nevada Fall, and side trails leading into Little Yosemite Valley. None showed clear signs of the direction Liam and Daniel might have taken, Mud in many places revealed boot prints, but there were too many, mostly from other visitors that day, making it impossible to identify which belonged to the missing men. No dropped items were found, no water bottles, hats, or jackets that could have provided direction. By midday, winds grew stronger and fog from the eastern valley thickened, making aerial observation more difficult and forcing the helicopter to cut back on scan time. Rangers noted that the mist trail's slickness increased rapidly, requiring greater caution when approaching sections near drop-offs. Still, the entire main route from Happy Isles to Nevada Fall was continuously checked throughout the afternoon, in hopes that if the two were lost or injured, they might appear within the nearest search perimeter. However, by the end of the day, SAR Phase 1 concluded without any physical evidence that Liam or Daniel had passed through the area after the last sighting. No responding calls, no clothing or items left behind, and no clear signs of a fall. The entire team returned to the staging area in a serious information deficit, while thick fog and strong winds continued to hinder operations, making nighttime searching nearly impossible to conduct safely. On the next day, with no leads whatsoever from Phase 1, SAR Phase 2 was activated with reinforced forces, including dog teams from neighboring districts and a thermal imaging system mounted on federal rescue helicopters to expand the scanning range into dense areas that were difficult for the human eye to access from both ground and air. From this point, the search plan was extended beyond the mist trail route, pushing deeper into Little Yosemite Valley and the side trails leading to Sunrise Creek, areas where hikers could inadvertently wander off when visibility was poor or exhaustion impaired their sense of direction. The teams divided into sectors. Dog teams started from the valley floor, following trails with old footprints. One ranger group moved along Sunrise Creek to check the possibility that the two victims had taken a wrong turn. The remaining team focused on inspecting the Merced River banks, especially the rapid flow sections right below Nevada Fall, and along the Rocky Islands, where the risk of being swept away was highest. Underwater, the dive team followed a grid search pattern, scanning section by section, paying particular attention to rocky edges where branches got snagged, points where unfortunate hikers who fell in could be retained. However, after many hours of work, there were no signs of human bodies, clothing, or any belongings of Liam and Daniel. From the air, thermal imaging detected no unusual heat sources within the allowable range, including rock alcoves typically checked in cases where victims sought shelter. On the ground, dog teams repeatedly picked up weak signals, but they all led to trail sections with high visitor traffic in previous days, making the results unverifiable. The SR coordination team began compiling data. If the two had continued up to Little Yosemite Valley after the last sighting, they could have gotten lost off trail towards Sunrise Creek. Or if they turned back down the mist trail in thick fog, the chance of slipping on wet, slick rocks was real. In the worst case, they could have fallen into steep positions leading into the strong current of the Merced River, where survival odds were virtually zero. However, those scenarios of falling, being swept away by water, or getting lost were all considered. There was no physical evidence supporting any of them. No fresh footprints, no skid marks, no fabric scraps caught on branches, no personal items dropped, things that typically appear in most missing persons cases on the mist trail. After nearly 2 weeks of continuous searching with all available resources mobilized, including rarely traveled trail sections and the most inaccessible dense areas, the SAR command team was forced to make the decision there were no longer any viable search directions to pursue. The case was shifted to presumed dead status, meaning the survival chances of Liam Harper and Daniel Brooks were assessed as virtually non-existent, and the official search concluded without recovering any conclusive evidence of their fate. 5 years after the official search was halted, and the files of Liam Harper and Daniel Brooks were transferred to presumed dead status, Yosemite continued to welcome millions of visitors each year, and the story of the two missing hikers gradually became one of many unsolved incidents in the park. But on an early summer afternoon, the Tuolumne Meadows store, a small stop serving visitors along Tioga Road, suddenly became the center of attention when a man walked in looking exhausted, his clothes caked in dirt and dust, and his face so gaunt that it was impossible to guess his age. The store staff, accustomed to dealing with weary hikers after long treks, initially thought this was just a visitor with health issues, but as the man approached the counter, his slow gait and vacant stare made them realize this was not a routine situation. One attentive employee noticed distinctive facial features on the stranger: a straight nose bridge, a small scar near the left eyebrow, details that remarkably matched the description of Liam Harper in the missing persons file from 5 years earlier. That suspicion quickly turned into an internal alert, and they immediately used the store's satellite phone to call the ranger responsible for the Tuolumne Meadows area. When the ranger arrived, the man was still standing by the shelves, not touching any items, not asking for help, and not reacting clearly when asked his name. The ranger noted that the man carried no backpack, had no wilderness gear whatsoever, and his clothing appeared to have gone a very long time without being replaced. When asked to step outside for a basic medical check, he complied mechanically, showing neither objection nor clear cooperation. The ranger immediately reviewed old missing persons cases in the mobile database and made a preliminary identification comparison with photos of Liam Harper before his disappearance. Despite significant changes due to time and physical condition, facial structure and several identifying features still matched. Unable to rule out the possibility that this was the victim missing for half a decade, the ranger decided to transport the man to the Yosemite Law Enforcement Office in the valley for official identity verification. During the transport, the man did not communicate, did not ask questions, and only stared at the vehicle floor in a dazed state. At the LE office headquarters, initial intake procedures were implemented: general health check, appearance comparison, and archival photography. But from the very first minutes, the rangers realized that identity verification would not be straightforward. The man did not confirm who he was, did not respond to questions about name, age, or residence, and showed no clear awareness of his surroundings. This situation placed authorities in a sensitive position. All identifying features leaned toward this being Liam Harper, the person previously presumed dead, but his vague behavior meant they could not rely on verbal confirmation. As the old file was pulled for comparison and advanced identification steps were prepared, pressure mounted significantly among involved units. Should he be treated as a medical emergency case or as a victim of an unknown event? Identity determination became the top priority, and shortly thereafter, the official identification process was initiated, starting with fingerprint collection for comparison against federal databases and the park's missing persons file. The ranger collected fingerprint samples using an electronic scanner and sent them directly to the AF's system, while another team prepared to collect DNA samples per forensic standards, including oral swabs and hair with follicles. The man neither resisted nor clearly cooperated, maintaining a blank expression throughout, forcing the rangers to proceed slowly to avoid adding stress. The wait for AF's response was longer than usual due to unstable connectivity in the high mountain area, but when the final results appeared, everyone in the room paused. The system confirmed a complete match with the fingerprints of Liam Harper, missing for 5 years. However, per federal protocol, fingerprint identification alone was not sufficient to close the case. DNA comparison with family samples was the final confirmation step. The man's DNA sample was urgently sent to the park's partner lab, which already held reference DNA from Liam's parents in the missing persons file. While awaiting results, rangers contacted the family for additional biomedical verification, but temporarily withheld any conclusions to avoid creating false hope. When the DNA report was returned, the genetic match index appeared at an absolute level, confirming that the man found at Tuolumne Meadows store was indeed Liam Harper. Official notification was sent to Liam's parents via priority channel, and they immediately headed to Yosemite that same night, carrying emotions mixed with joy, confusion, and fear, since no one knew what had happened during the 5 years Liam was missing. As soon as identity was confirmed, Yosemite law enforcement completed initial legal procedures, changing the Liam Harper, missing persons case file to recovered individual status, while automatically opening a new file classified as criminal investigation, unknown circumstances, because the reappearance of a long-term missing person is always considered anomalous, especially when the individual shows signs of depletion and cannot self-report information. The file scope was expanded to include newly collected medical history, criminal identification, physical condition, behavior, and the last known timeline before Liam's disappearance. The internal system simultaneously issued notices to relevant park units, requiring preservation of all old missing persons data for reinvestigation. At the Lee office, successful identity verification did not simplify the situation. On the contrary, the Rangers understood this was merely the beginning of a series of new questions needing clarification. Liam was transferred to a temporary medical monitoring area, while the case team prepared reports per regulations for long-term missing persons cases with recovered victims. Shortly afterward, he was taken to the Yosemite Law Enforcement Specialized Medical Examination Area, where a team of doctors was already waiting to conduct a comprehensive health assessment. From the initial observations, malnutrition was evident, BMI below the minimum for a healthy adult, atrophied muscles, virtually no fat tissue, and skin tightly drawn over bones in a manner typical of prolonged nutrient deprivation. Quick blood tests revealed low protein levels, severe vitamin deficiencies, especially fat-soluble vitamins, and the most critical shortfall in vitamin D, a type the body synthesizes only with sunlight exposure. The vitamin D level was so low it was rarely seen in people living outdoors or leading normal lives. Such levels occur only when the subject has been restricted from natural light for extended periods, continuously over many months or years. Liam's skin reflected this pale gray surface with no pigment variation in areas typically exposed like arms and neck, indicating he had not lived outdoors during the missing period. When doctors examined wrists and ankles, they noted deep, dark, irregular indentations, suggesting repeated friction with hard material, most likely rough rope or metal restraints. These marks were not one-time occurrences, but clearly cumulative thickened skin layers interspersed with small cracks, exactly the type of damage from being bound for long periods, released and rebound. Some surrounding soft tissue showed chronic inflammation, meaning the binding was ongoing, not short-term. Shifting to X-rays, the medical team discovered additional abnormalities, at least 2 ribs previously fractured, but healed misaligned, indicating no proper medical intervention at the time of injury. An old crack in the right forearm bone also showed uneven healing, consistent with no splinting or professional fixation. On the back and shoulders, soft tissue showed signs of prolonged pressure damage, common in people forced to lie or sit for many hours on hard surfaces without posture changes. The callus distribution on heels and outer foot edges did not resemble that of hikers or active individuals, but rather someone with restricted movement, little standing or walking, and repeated pressure from a fixed floor or surface. Liam's hair grew unevenly, with some sections broken short as if cut, yanked, or abraded against hard objects. Nails were long, dull, and had deep vertical ridges, signs of prolonged bodily stress, poor nutrition, and possible chemical or unclean environmental exposure. Examination of soft tissue on feet and neck revealed old hematomas turned yellowish-brown, present for at least weeks before discovery. This ruled out Liam having just escaped a natural environment without mechanical violence. In the abdominal area, doctors noted atrophy of transverse and lower abdominal muscles, typically seen only in those inactive for long periods or moving in confined spaces. Liam's breathing was weak, lung capacity below standard, suggesting a living environment with poor ventilation or limited fresh airflow over time. Inner ear examination showed eardrum buildup of fine dust, consistent with an enclosed, uncleaned space with particle accumulation from wood or building materials. Overall analysis led doctors to conclude that no injuries on Liam's body aligned with surviving outdoors for 5 years. Instead, all medical data pointed to a unified pattern: he had been controlled, deprived of light and nutrition, restricted in movement, and subjected to untreated injuries in an enclosed environment for a very long time. With that conclusion, the medical file was completed, and Liam was transferred to the clinical psychological evaluation area, where specialists began observing his behavior and responses in controlled conditions. As soon as he entered a room with brighter light than the medical area, he immediately raised his hands to shield his eyes, turned his face to the wall, and curled up, a typical reaction in someone isolated from natural light for too long. When the doctor dimmed the lights, he relaxed somewhat but still avoided direct eye contact with anyone, keeping his gaze fixed on the floor and absolutely avoiding eye interaction. During movement, staff footsteps in the hallway caused Liam to startle strongly, adopting an instinctive defensive posture, then backing into a corner wall, resembling reflexes in someone whose environment associated footsteps with impending danger. When the room door opened, even slightly, his body tensed immediately, breathing accelerated, and hands clenched tightly. Enough for the doctor to note this as not ordinary anxiety, but a hallmark of trauma conditioning, a reflex formed when the victim was previously punished or cornered, whenever doors opened or others moved. These repeated reactions led specialists to conclude that Liam likely lived in a tightly controlled enclosed environment where minor stimuli like bright light, footsteps, and door openings carried high threat levels. During trial interviews, Liam showed minimal cooperation, but was almost unable to complete answers. When asked to describe simple events like his last day with family, responses were fragmented, sometimes trailing off mid-sentence or repeating meaningless phrases. However, the most abnormal reaction emerged when specialists mentioned the name Daniel Brooks. Each time Daniel's name was spoken, Liam immediately avoided by folding forward, covering his head with both hands or turning to the wall, accompanied by unstable breathing and slight hand tremors. He refused to answer any questions related to Daniel, even simple ones just confirming their relationship. This reaction was recorded as more severe than others, indicating that Daniel's name, or any related memories from the missing years, were strong psychological triggers. Psychologists assessed that such intense avoidance only occurs in victims conditioned through threats or violence when mentioning a specific subject, meaning Liam may have been forced into silence about Daniel via prolonged punishment or threats. In basic cognitive testing, Liam could identify simple objects and follow short instructions, but verbal expression was severely impaired. Answering questions about time, orientation, or events was nearly impossible. Specialists noted signs of dissociation, detachment of cognition from reality, a self-defense mechanism in long-term captivity victims. This dissociation was evident when he stared at a fixed point in the room and failed to respond for seconds to minutes. Given this condition, the specialist team agreed that direct or aggressive interrogation could push Liam into acute panic disorder or even re-trigger conditioned reflexes from captivity. The psychologists immediately recommended a special interrogation protocol for long-term captivity victims, avoid bright light, limit loud noises, minimize people present, avoid blocking the door, no forced questions about Daniel, allow pauses as needed, and use open-ended questioning, combining clinical experts and investigators trained in captivity trauma. This protocol was forwarded to Yosemite law enforcement the same day, as Liam's psychological state not only reflected years of captivity, but directly impacted the ability to gather information for the investigation. When the special protocol was implemented, the investigators began the first formal interview session in an environment adjusted for noise and lighting in accordance with recommendations, with the objective limited to collecting basic information without forcing deeper exploration into complex events. When asked about the last time he was with Daniel Brooks, Liam responded disjointedly that Daniel died on the second day of the trip, and he repeated it in a flat tone, almost devoid of emotional variation. When the investigator rephrased the question in different forms, such as "Where did Daniel have the accident?" "What happened to Daniel?" or "Where were you two when the incident occurred?" Liam still only repeated the single sentence, "Daniel died on the second day," without adding any details about the location, circumstances, or actions leading to the death. Throughout the interview session lasting more than an hour, he repeated this sentence at least 8 times, and each repetition was identical to the point where the pauses between syllables and the length of breaks matched exactly, leaving a strong impression on the investigators that this was not a spontaneous response, but a memorized script. When asked to describe the events of the previous day, the first day the two climbed Mist Trail, Liam could not provide any consistent information. When asked about the third day, he gave no response at all, only lowering his head and clasping his hands tightly together. The investigators cross-referenced the statement with old data from the missing persons file. The last group of hikers to see Liam and Daniel was around 4:10 p.m. on the first day, very close to Nevada Fall. For Daniel to die on the second day, the two would have had to spend the night in thick fog and low temperatures, which was not impossible, but completely inconsistent with the fact that they carried very little equipment for overnight outdoor stays. Additionally, the terrain from Nevada Fall to Little Yosemite Valley has no clear rock crevice matching the brief description, Liam repeated. And if a serious accident had occurred, the likelihood of leaving traces on the trail, rock surfaces, or the Merced River bank would be very high. Yet SAR phases 1 and 2 found no physical signs of that type. Moreover, the timeline in the statement was incompatible with reasonable hiking behavior. If Daniel died on the second day, Liam should have been near the accident site when SAR was deployed, but no traces indicated the presence of either in any nearby areas during the first 2 days of searching. The investigators continued testing the stability of the statement by changing the question structure, whether Liam could describe the direction of travel, terrain changes, or any landmarks indicating where the accident occurred. However, no response varied. He stuck to the exact same sentence, Daniel died on the second day, even when the questions were no longer directly related. This was an anomaly, immediately noted by the investigation team. As in prolonged missing persons cases, victims typically provide fragmented, disjointed, or uncertain information, but rarely repeat an identical scripted phrase to such a mechanical degree. The psychologists monitoring the interrogation observed that whenever a question mentioning Daniel was asked, Liam immediately showed signs of nervous tension, shoulders tensing, slightly rapid breathing, avoiding eye contact, similar to conditioned reflexes noted during the psychological evaluation phase. This heightened suspicion that the response about Daniel's death was not formed from real memory, but from compulsion in the prior captivity environment. In the internal report, the investigation team noted that Liam's statement contained a fixed pattern, not arising from free recall, but from a pre-established structure, most likely related to his prolonged captivity. The investigators also noted the contradiction between the terrain reality and the statement, the Mist Trail area and side routes have no location fitting the concept of a fatal rock crevice without leaving traces. Furthermore, both carried insufficient gear for overnight stays, making movement into the second day in bad weather even more suspicious. When compiling Liam's entire initial statement, the case team classified it as unreliable and marked it as unverified data. No details from the statement were used to guide the investigation at this point due to the high level of contradiction and likelihood of influence from coercive factors. This conclusion was recorded in the case file as an essential part of the initial analysis phase. Liam Harper's statement about Daniel Brooks's death on the second day could not be considered accurate information, and verification must be conducted through independent methods rather than relying on the victim's memory. Immediately after Liam Harper's initial statement was assessed as unreliable, the Yosemite Law Enforcement Forensics Team was requested to conduct a comprehensive analysis of all items on his person at the time he was found, including clothing, shoes, skin tissue samples, and any material adhering to fabric surfaces. The analysis began with the shoes, as they typically retain the clearest environmental traces. Soil samples were taken from the tread grooves, rubber edges, and dried mud around the heels, then sent to a partner geological analysis lab to determine mineral composition and geographic origin. The results immediately raised major questions for the investigation team. The soil contained mineral structures characteristic of the Hetch Hetchy area, a region more than 20 miles, as the crow flies from Mist Trail, completely mismatched with Liam and Daniel's planned route. Soil at Mist Trail is rich in silica from granite, while the sample from Liam's shoes contained high ratios of amphibolite and mineral grains, showing long-term compression in a moist environment, only present in certain areas around Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. This ruled out contamination from wind or indirect contact. The mineral grain distribution proved Liam had directly walked on the soil surface around Hetch Hetchy for an extended period. The next analysis focused on Liam's pants. When scanning the fabric surface with an electron microscope, forensics discovered a dense layer of fungal spores adhering from the knees to the ankles. This spore type does not exist on open, airy trails like Mist Trail, but appears in enclosed, poorly ventilated, consistently humid environments, such as under wooden floors, storage basements, or old cabin structures. The spore development cycle and dense adhesion on the pants indicated Liam's exposure to this enclosed environment was not for hours or days, but continuously over a significant period. This completely contradicted the statement that he and Daniel only moved near Nevada Fall on the second day before the accident. If that statement were true, Liam's pants should contain stone moss spores, granite mineral dust, or light mud from the Merced River, not fungi from a prolonged enclosed and stable environment. Moving to skin tissue examination at the wrists and ankles, the forensics team found indentations consistent with repeated friction from polypropylene material, a synthetic fiber commonly used in ropes, cargo ties, or industrial straps. When analyzing microfibers on the skin via infrared absorption spectroscopy, the spectral bands matched old-style polypropylene, not common in modern hiker outdoor gear, but typical in cheap binding ropes, construction ties, or temporary storage facilities. The highest microfiber concentration was at the wrist and ankle sites, matching the indentations previously noted by medical examiners. This characteristic only appears when rope contacts skin for extended periods, tightened and loosened repeatedly, leaving uneven circular damage patterns. This was objective evidence that Liam had been restrained, completely contrary to the statement content that he moved freely until Daniel died on the second day. Not stopping there, forensics continued analyzing abrasion marks along the pant legs and part of the shirt back. The horizontal wear patterns, evenly spaced, indicated repeated rubbing against rough, untreated wood. Using optical microscopy, the team detected small wood fiber fragments embedded in the fabric, some with cellular structures from the Archangel pine family common in old temporary or abandoned cabins in lesser visited Yosemite areas. The wear direction on the fabric showed Liam not only sat or stood near wood, but continuously leaned his back or shoulders against it for long periods, or was forced into stable pressure contact with these rough wooden beams. This once again negated the possibility he was outdoors, as hikers rarely experience such high-frequency repeated contact with cabin wood while moving freely. Finally, forensics compiled all results into a single report. The soil in the shoe treads proved prolonged presence at Hetch Hetchy. Fungal spores on the pants confirmed an enclosed, humid, poorly ventilated environment. Polypropylene fibers on wrist and ankle skin proved prolonged physical restraint. Abrasion marks and old pine wood fragments on clothing indicated frequent contact with an old cabin structure. None of these data points matched or supported Liam's initial statement that Daniel died on the second day of the trip and that he only wandered near Mist Trail before collapsing from exhaustion. On the contrary, the entire system of physical evidence affirmed he had been in a completely different area, under enclosed captivity conditions without light, with prolonged bodily restraint. The forensics report therefore clearly concluded that Liam Harper's initial statement could not reflect objective truth, and the degree of contradiction between the statement and physical evidence was large enough to completely eliminate any evidentiary value of the statement in determining the disappearance events. When the forensics report indicated that Liam Harper could not have been freely wandering in the wilderness for 5 years, the investigation team shifted focus to reconstructing an independent timeline based on technical data and real-world activity traces without relying on the victim's statement. The first step was reviewing all remaining financial information in the missing persons file, particularly credit card accounts frozen after the first year of Liam's disappearance. During this process, an unusual detail emerged. One of Liam's secondary credit cards, previously considered unused, showed small periodic transactions in the town of Groveland, more than an hour's drive west of Yosemite Valley. The transactions occurred regularly every 3-4 weeks, low value from $8 to $15, mostly at 2 local convenience stores, typically in late afternoon or evening hours. This spending pattern did not match a missing victim's behavior but closely fit that of someone using the card for basic necessities like canned goods, instant noodles, or cheap supplies. Notably, all transactions were processed through old POS machines without security cameras, making user identification impossible. But the consistent rhythm over more than 3 years showed someone intentionally maintained use of Liam's card, just enough to avoid suspicion, but not enough to alert the bank. Investigators traced the leads to the Groveland post office and discovered a P.O. box rented with false information, opened at the exact time the card transactions began, and used to receive small packages declared as dried food or cheap consumer goods. No real name was registered, but the signature sample for renting the box showed mechanical characteristics consistent with someone concealing identity, abbreviated, quick writing, uneven pen pressure. Packages to this P.O. box were always picked up within 24 hours by the same person, according to post office staff descriptions. A man wearing a dark hat, not talkative, usually arriving near closing time. This activity chain ran from 2018 to 2022, 4 years of Liam's total disappearance period. While reviewing trail camera records from Yosemite and surrounding areas within a 20-mile radius, a significant discovery occurred. A wildlife monitoring camera in the northwest Hetch Hetchy region captured mid-2021 images of a thin man walking slowly, with long tangled hair, wearing old dark clothing. Though image quality was low, the technical department's facial comparison algorithm yielded a high match ratio with Liam Harper's jaw structure and facial bone proportions. The anomaly was that the man carried no backpack, no outdoor gear, and moved in a manner unaccustomed to long-distance travel. Additionally, the shadow of another person briefly appeared at the frame edge, taller, with stronger strides, but due to lighting and distance, identity analysis was impossible. However, the proximity of 2 people in an area with almost no passing hikers, due to rugged terrain off main trails, led the team to suspect this was not free movement, but controlled displacement. When combining this data with the soil sample on Liam's shoes, matching Hetch Hetchy mineral composition, the timeline became clearer. Liam had been present in this area for an extended time. The final clue solidifying the timeline was Daniel Brooks's old GPS device, recorded as lost with the victim in 2018, suddenly pinging once in 2022. The signal was very weak, lasting only seconds, but sufficient to pinpoint location, the southern edge of Hetch Hetchy, near a dense forest rarely visited by tourists. The device then went silent, most likely destroyed or out of battery. The fact that a device missing for 5 years suddenly signaled in a completely different area from missed trail reinforced the hypothesis that Liam and Daniel were removed from the Nevada Fall area very early after losing contact. From these scattered data points, the investigation team constructed a new timeline. In the initial days after disappearance, Liam and Daniel left the missed trail area, not voluntarily. In subsequent years, Liam was held at a location near Hetch Hetchy, an area isolated enough to avoid detection. The credit card usage pattern indicated someone supplying necessities while keeping spending low to avoid attention. The Groveland P.O. box showed indirect resupply methods. The 2021 trail camera proved Liam was alive then, and moving with another person. Daniel's 2022 GPS signal showed his device appeared in the suspected captivity area. When synthesized, the investigators realized this pattern did not fit any independent wilderness survival scenario, but only matched a case of controlled movement, minimal feeding, and restricted external contact. The reconstructed timeline not only completely refuted Liam's initial statement, but also indicated that throughout the 5 years missing, he had undergone a series of purposeful movements, controlled by another individual, with all data converging on the remote area around Hetch Hetchy, where investigators began suspecting the existence of a facility or structure capable of holding a person long-term, without detection. When the reconstructed timeline showed Liam Harper's movement centered around the Hetch Hetchy area, the investigation team decided to deploy dog teams to the most remote dense forest sections to search for lingering biological traces that could lead to the captivity location. After 2 days of broad sweeping, one of the cadaver-scent dogs trained for long-term human presence in enclosed environments suddenly stopped at a forest line north of Harding Lake, several trail miles from Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. The dog repeatedly turned and alerted, pulling hard in the same direction, forcing the support team to expand the search deeper into an area with virtually no trails. At the edge of a low slope, they discovered an old wooden cabin not listed on any resident maps or permitted Yosemite structures. The cabin was nestled among large tree trunks, with a moss-covered slanted roof, yet the overall structure was unusually intact for a decades-abandoned building. As they approached, the dog teams continued strong reactions, confirming the cabin's association with prolonged human scent, and the scent signature was not recent but accumulated over long periods. Investigators began a quick perimeter check without entering the cabin, adhering to search warrant protocols. They discovered a fire pit with recent use signs, black charcoal still structurally intact, ash not fully washed away, indicating fire was lit within weeks or even days before the team's arrival. The ash cohesion and faint lingering smoke odor in the soil showed intentional burning, not remnants from casual overnight hikers, as this area lies on no permitted backpacking routes. Near the fire pit, investigators observed a series of faint boot prints in soft soil, larger than average with tread patterns unlike common hiker boots, but resembling heavy-duty work boots used for labor or high-durability environments. Some prints led into the cabin, others toward the eastern forest edge, forming a repeated path indicating frequent comings and goings. Closer examination of the cabin exterior revealed the front door barred by a horizontal wooden beam from inside, meaning the cabin was either currently in use or had been intentionally secured. At the rear, one longer plank stood out with fresh slide marks, as if pulled out and reattached. When lightly tapped with a long pole, a hollow echo suggested space below. Investigators noted this as likely a trapdoor, a concealed access to an underground basement or storage area. However, since the cabin was on federally managed land with clear signs of prolonged unauthorized use, the team could not forcibly enter or open the trapdoor without a warrant. Another group recorded precise GPS coordinates of the cabin, mapped a 200-meter radius around it, photographed the scene, and collected non-invasive samples such as fallen wood fragments, fire pit ash, and soil from boot print locations. All data was encrypted and sent directly to the Yosemite Law Enforcement Office for compilation. By day's end, the collected evidence was sufficient to determine the cabin was not abandoned but regularly used, with recent survival signs, and likely connected to Liam's captivity based on matching fungal spores, wood fragments, and restraint marks previously found on him. The lead investigator drafted an emergency request to federal court for a search warrant of the cabin and any related underground spaces, citing risk of serious crime evidence, possible additional victims, and direct link to the 5-year disappearance case. The warrant request was submitted that night, marking a major turning point as the Harding Lake cabin became the primary suspect location in the investigation. Immediately after the federal court issued the search warrant, the investigation team proceeded to open the trapdoor at the old cabin on Harding Lake, revealing a passage down to a meticulously concealed underground bunker beneath the wooden floor. As soon as they descended, the forensic team and investigators noted the internal structure, a sealed room, soundproofed with thick foam panels and additional wooden planks, spacious enough for a few people but cramped, containing a sturdy iron table, along with leg chains fixed to the load-bearing posts. A small camera still connected by wires to a simple electrical system on the ceiling, indicating active monitoring of the bunker. The forensics team began collecting samples from the floor surfaces, scratches on the walls, remaining restraint ropes, and small electronic devices in the bunker, labeling and preserving them strictly according to forensic standards. In an opposite corner of the wall, a detention rules board was clearly hung, listing instructions about not standing upright, not making any sounds, and maintaining silence, reflecting a systematic behavior control regime. Surveying the bunker floor, experts noticed an area of disturbed soil, with dust and sand mixed with small ash particles, clearly indicating the burial or storage of large objects. The forensic team carefully excavated and discovered the remains of Daniel Brooks, identified through preliminary biological traces. Evidence collected from the bunker, including restraint ropes, scratch marks, and fragments from the bunker structure, was compared to traces on Liam Harper's body, showing matches in position and type of injury, confirming that Liam had endured the same environment for an extended period. Additionally, footprints, scratches, and lingering odors in the bunker indicated that this was a location frequently used by one or more individuals during the time the victim was held. All data, including soil samples, restraint marks, electronic items, and the rules board, were encoded and transported to the lab for more detailed analysis aimed at determining the bunker's usage timeframe and detention methods. The initial aggregated results showed that this bunker was not only the site where the victim was held, but also the primary scene of the prolonged disappearance spanning many years, with direct physical evidence linking to Liam Harper and Daniel Brooks, reflecting the prolonged control and violence the victims endured. The entire bunker was sealed and preserved according to forensic procedures, and the collected data was compiled into a preliminary report sent to the Central Yosemite Investigation Team, marking this as a pivotal point in determining the victims' locations and conditions, as well as the basis for continuing an expanded investigation, without revealing any further developments beyond the scope of the detention bunker and the collected physical evidence. After identifying the underground bunker at the cabin near Harding Lake as the primary crime scene, the investigation team began analyzing the perpetrator's modus operandi to build a behavioral profile of the offender and explain the logic running through the chain of events spanning many years. From aggregated data on unresolved missing hikers cases in the Yosemite area, a pattern gradually emerged. The targeted individuals were mostly solo hikers or very small groups, usually 2 people, experienced enough to confidently travel independently, but not numerous enough to create a deterrent factor. Liam Harper and Daniel Brooks fit this model perfectly, 2 adults with a clear plan, without satellite communication devices, and choosing a popular trail during the day, but sparsely populated in the late afternoon. Analysis of the last time they were seen showed that the perpetrator did not act randomly, but selected time frames with psychological advantages after 3 p.m. When the number of returning hikers dropped sharply, weather often became variable, and ranger attention was dispersed. The method of subduing was inferred from both traces on Liam's body and terrain features. The injuries were inconsistent with direct confrontation, but indicated surprise and speed, rendering the victim immediately incapable of resistance. This aligned with the use of a low-power stun gun or preset wire traps on narrow trail sections where hikers were forced to walk single file. Mist Trail and the area near Sunrise Creek were assessed as ideal locations for this type of attack. Steep terrain, many blind curves, loud waterfall noise, masking unusual sounds, and dense vegetation sufficient to conceal an ambusher for the critical few seconds. The perpetrator was highly likely deeply familiar with the terrain, knowing exactly the positions where victims could not escape or call for help effectively. After subduing, the biggest challenge was transporting the victim away from the crowded tourist area without detection. Analysis of the timeline and traffic camera data showed that the perpetrator did not immediately transport the victim by motorized vehicle from Mist Trail, as the risk of being seen was too high. Instead, the most plausible scenario was short overland movement to an intermediate point near Sunrise Creek or an off-trail low-traffic area, where they could wait until night or bad weather for further transport. The use of polypropylene ropes and signs of restricted movement on Liam indicated the victim was tightly restrained, possibly blindfolded or placed in intermittent unconscious states. From the intermediate point, the perpetrator likely used a personal vehicle, a truck or SUV familiar with forest roads, to transport the victim via secondary routes with few cameras toward Hetch Hetchy. This distance was far enough to separate the victim from the initial search area, but still within the perpetrator's well-controlled region. The choice of Hetch Hetchy was not random. The area has lower tourist density than Yosemite Valley, many abandoned old structures, unregistered cabins, and terrain allowing long-term concealed activity without drawing attention. Analysis of the detention bunker showed the perpetrator's purpose was not robbery or quick killing, but long-term captivity involving power and coercion. The rules board, camera system, and soundproofing reflected a need for absolute control over the victim's behavior and space. The perpetrator sought no direct material gain. Instead, the motive appeared to lie in maintaining power, creating complete dependence, and controlling the victim both physically and psychologically. Keeping Liam alive for many years, despite harsh conditions, indicated the perpetrator planned to sustain a barely alive state rather than neglect. The difference in Daniel Brooks's fate, based on remains and signs of violence, showed that when a victim no longer fit the control objectives, or when the perpetrator felt power challenged, lethal violence could occur. The entire modus operandi reflected a highly calculated, patient criminal pattern with deep knowledge of the operating environment and victim psychology. The perpetrator did not act impulsively, but built a sustainable detention system, selecting suitable victims, locations, and timings to minimize detection risks. The MO analysis conclusion showed this was not an accident or random act, but a deliberate, prolonged chain of actions in which Yosemite was not just the setting, but a tool the perpetrator fully exploited to commit and conceal their crimes. After the offender's behavioral model and detention methods were established, investigators began reconstructing in detail the process of Liam Harper and Daniel Brooks being held in the underground bunker at Hetch Hetchy for 5 years, based on evidence collected from the scene, traces on the victim's body, and remaining items. The victim's daily routine was strictly established by the perpetrator. Eating, resting, and movement times were entirely decided by the perpetrator, with rest periods calculated to maintain minimal vitality, but not allow full physical or mental recovery. Meals consisted of basic foods, mostly prepared or provided in short cycles, sufficient to keep the victims alive, but not enough energy for normal physical activity. When Liam or Daniel failed to comply precisely with requirements, the perpetrator applied punishments, from food restriction, forcing prolonged standing or kneeling on hard surfaces, to using ropes to hold the body in uncomfortable positions, creating pain and loss of autonomy. In the early weeks, Daniel was forced to perform labor tasks, such as stacking firewood, cleaning the bunker area, and moving heavy objects, while Liam was closely monitored to prevent interference or assistance. The prolonged labor, combined with restricted nutrition and constant psychological pressure, led to severe health decline in Daniel, ultimately causing his death in the bunker, confirmed through violent signs on the remains. After Daniel's death, Liam was completely isolated, with all his activities more tightly controlled. Without a companion, he was confined to limited space, continuously monitored, and denied external communication. The perpetrator applied measures to force the victim to learn false statements. Liam was instructed to repeatedly recite a story about Daniel's death and events before the disappearance, so that if anyone asked about Daniel, he would respond according to the perpetrator's preset script. This forced learning occurred regularly, often combined with punishment or mild penalties for forgetting or deviating, causing the victim to develop an automatic reflex to repeat the response without thinking, while increasing fear and dependence on the perpetrator. This entire process was maintained continuously for many years, with minimal changes to the routine, punishments, and monitoring, creating a complete behavior control model that allowed Liam to survive, but simultaneously forced compliance with rules and false statements, enabling the perpetrator to maintain absolute power and protect the secrecy of the long-term captivity. After the reconstruction of the captivity history was completed, and Liam Harper became more psychologically stable, thanks to special interrogation measures, investigators proceeded to take additional statements to gather direct information from the victim about the perpetrator and details of the events leading to Daniel Brooks's death. In this statement session, Liam for the first time provided the full identity of the perpetrator, Evan Colhart, an individual recorded as living in the Wawona area with extensive experience and knowledge of Yosemite terrain as well as lesser-traveled forest routes. Liam described in detail the moment Daniel was killed. Around the second week after they were moved from Mist Trail, Daniel was forced to perform heavy labor tasks under Colhart's direct supervision, combined with restricted diet and punishments for rule violations. When Daniel could no longer complete tasks or cause disagreement with the perpetrator, he was subjected to direct violence, leading to death. Data from the remains, injury traces on ribs, and old bruises matched the timing and method Liam described, indicating the authenticity of the new statement. Liam also provided information about how he was forced to learn and repeat false statements related to Daniel's death and events before capture. Each day, under Colhart's supervision, Liam had to memorize and recite the script composed by the perpetrator, with mild punishments or food restrictions for non-compliance, creating automatic reflexes and prolonged psychological pressure. These details fully matched previously collected forensic data, including positions and types of skin scratches, polypropylene ropes, fungal spores on clothing, and long-term wood contact traces, all proving the victim was held in a sealed, absolutely controlled environment, enduring prolonged coercion for many years. Liam's additional statement also described transport methods between Mist Trail, Sunrise Creek, and the Hetch Hetchy area, matching GPS data and camera trap information collected during the 5-year disappearance timeline reconstruction, confirming the perpetrator's systematically controlled victim movement and selected secret detention locations. Furthermore, Liam provided information about Colhart's behaviors to maintain power and control, direct monitoring, physical punishments, communication restrictions, and forcing compliance with the bunker's rules board. These details aligned with physical traces at the scene, such as fabric wear marks, remaining leg chains, iron table, and wall-hung rules board. Thanks to this additional statement, the investigation team could determine the specific time, method, and responsibility of the perpetrator for Daniel's death, while strengthening the connection between all physical evidence, forensic data, and victim behavior. The details provided by Liam were encoded and entered into the official file, creating a unified data block to lock in suspect Evan Colhart in the criminal investigation dossier. All evidence collected from the cabin detention bunker, traces on Liam's and Daniel's bodies, as well as GPS, camera trap, and environmental analysis data were directly linked to the new statement, ensuring the perpetrator could not deny responsibility. As a result, Liam's additional statement not only provided the perpetrator's identity and specific timing of Daniel's killing, but also detailed the entire process of coercion, control, and prolonged captivity, while tightly linking to prior forensic data, creating a solid legal foundation for proceeding with next investigation steps and preparing the prosecution file, while keeping all information focused within the scope of the detention bunker scene and events verified from the 5-year disappearance. After the supplemental statement from Liam Harper and the compiled forensic data, the investigation team proceeded to identify potential locations of the perpetrator, Evan Colhart, focusing on the Wawona area where he was known to reside and possess in-depth knowledge of the Yosemite terrain. Investigators cross-referenced the movement routes of his personal pickup truck, recorded via traffic cameras and GPS data, with timelines gathered from the P.O. box in Groveland, credit card transactions, and camera traps, in order to determine the routes the perpetrator used to transport the victims or resupply. Behavioral movement analysis revealed that Colehart maintained a fixed yet flexible pattern. He frequently appeared at isolated locations near Mist Trail or Sunrise Creek, moving during times with few tourists, and always returning to the Wawona area to monitor the cabin and the detention bunker. On that basis, the FBI coordinated with Yosemite law enforcement to plan the approach to the target, establishing multiple SWAT teams with specific roles, one team advancing into the cabin from the main direction, another blocking the rear to prevent the perpetrator from fleeing, while a third monitored access routes and potential escape paths. The entire team was thoroughly prepared with data on the cabin's dimensions, surrounding terrain, distances from observation points, and secondary paths, along with contingency plans in case the perpetrator resisted or attempted to escape through the dense forest. On the morning of the operation, the SWAT team moved to the cabin location with continuous coordinated communication, using GPS positioning technology and drones to pinpoint Colehart's exact location within the cabin premises. As agents approached the front door, they discovered the perpetrator's pickup truck parked outside, fully matching historical movement data and previous appearances. This confirmed that Colehart was present in the area, and the likelihood of escape was virtually zero. The SWAT team approached the cabin as planned, isolating all exits, and when the command was issued, the perpetrator had no time for strong resistance, was subdued on the spot, and safely taken into custody. After securing Colehart, the forensic team and investigators conducted a rapid search of the cabin to collect additional evidence, restraints, remaining items, soil and ash samples from the fire pit, electronic devices, and any objects potentially related to the long-term detention of the victims. All evidence was documented, categorized, and sealed according to forensic procedures to preserve all data for subsequent prosecution steps. Connections between the second cabin location, Colehart's movement behavior, and data collected from Liam Harper's previous detention bunker were entered into the central case file, providing legal grounds and direct evidence to establish the perpetrator's responsibility for the entire chain of events spanning many years. The operation concluded successfully without casualties to law enforcement or surrounding civilians, while seizing all critical evidence in preparation for the trial and subsequent legal proceedings. After Evan Colehart was arrested at the second cabin in Wawona, the investigation file was transferred to federal court for the trial proceedings, where all forensic evidence, physical items collected at the scenes, and testimony from Liam Harper were presented in detail to the jury. Prosecutors began by presenting physical evidence, including polypropylene ropes, marks on Liam's body and Daniel Brooks's remains, ash and debris from the fire pit, soil samples and fungal spores collected at the cabin and detention bunker, all tested to forensic standards and cross-referenced with prior technical data such as GPS, camera traps, and the perpetrator's movement routes. Expert witnesses were called sequentially to provide scientific information and analysis. The forensic pathologist described injuries on the victims' bodies, restraint marks and abrasion evidence proving prolonged detention. The psychologist explained Liam's behavioral responses, trauma conditioning, the formation of repeated reflexes, and why the victim's initial statements were deemed unreliable. The investigation team presented the entire tracing process from Groveland, the P.O. box, the 2021 camera trap, to Daniel's GPS signal, clarifying the controlled movement chain during the 5 years of disappearance. Next, prosecutors reconstructed the chain of events by combining forensic data, Liam's supplemental testimony, and physical evidence from the detention bunker, the second cabin, and movement routes, explaining how the perpetrator selected targets, methods of subduing, transporting victims, and establishing long-term detention bunkers to fully control victim behavior. The jury was presented with each timeline milestone, location, and detailed control method, helping them visualize the entire process from disappearance, detention, to Daniel Brooks's death, and Liam Harper's forced survival. During the trial, physical evidence data was directly cross-referenced with the perpetrator's statements, including timelines and locations, showing that all of Coulhart's actions aligned with the pattern of prolonged detention, controlled victim movement, and forced false testimony learning, while ruling out any possibility of accident or coincidence. Experts emphasized that the detention bunker and cabin were intentionally designed and used, with camera systems, rule boards, and restraint mechanisms, proving motives of power and coercion, clarifying the perpetrator's direct responsibility for all criminal acts and Daniel Brooks's death. Defense attorneys attempted to mitigate responsibility by arguing the perpetrator's mental state and isolated living environment, but all physical, forensic, and supplemental victim testimony evidence were tightly linked, proving systematic preparation, intent, and complete control by the perpetrator, rendering the defense arguments unconvincing. After all evidence was presented, the jury took time to evaluate the entire file, consulting expert opinions and assessing consistency between testimony, physical evidence, and forensic data. The final result was unanimous agreement that Evan Coulhart was directly responsible for the prolonged detention, coercive violence, and Daniel Brooks's death. Based on this verdict, the federal court sentenced the perpetrator to 2 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole, plus an additional 30 years for charges including kidnapping, resulting in death, first-degree murder, unlawful imprisonment, and torture, while noting this as the maximum penalty under federal law for calculated and prolonged crimes. The court also ordered the confiscation of all related evidence and preservation of forensic data for monitoring during the sentence, while confirming the investigation file was closed with complete conclusions on behavior, responsibility, and connections between the perpetrator and victims, establishing a solid legal foundation for any potential appeals or additional legal procedures that might arise later. After the trial and official verdict against Evan Coulhart, Daniel Brooks's family proceeded with post-mortem arrangements, including receiving the remains, conducting burial rites according to family wishes, and settling legal procedures related to inheritance and the victim's legal rights. At the same time, they began the journey of emotional recovery and confronting trauma prolonged over many years of waiting for information about their son. Liam Harper's family, though fortunate to be reunited with their loved one, also had to undergo a long process of supporting his recovery from physical and psychological injuries due to 5 years of detention, including coordination with psychologists for therapy, rehabilitation physicians, and social workers to help Liam reintegrate into normal life while ensuring he had the necessary space and privacy to avoid re-triggering stress responses and trauma conditioning he had experienced. Regarding Yosemite National Park, park management immediately implemented adjustments to safety regulations and trail management, including increased patrols, additional monitoring stations, installation of surveillance cameras in key areas, and dissemination of new guidelines for hikers, emphasizing traveling in large groups, carrying communication devices, and adhering to schedules to minimize similar disappearance risks in the future. In addition, communication efforts were tightly coordinated. The case was brought to light in national media, drawing strong public and hiking community attention, leading to widespread discussions on park safety issues, management agency responsibilities, and victim rights. Non-governmental organizations and missing persons support groups participated in awareness campaigns, using the case as an illustrative example to raise awareness about safe travel in wilderness areas while providing legal aid and psychological counseling to families who had experienced similar situations. Public opinion, including online communities and hiking groups, reacted strongly to the case, showing concern for both legal and humanitarian aspects. Many shared experiences, warned each other about risks, and praised law enforcement and the Yosemite SAR team for their coordination and bringing the case to a final resolution. Schools, hiking clubs, and federal tourism agencies also reviewed policies, organizing sessions on long-distance hiking safety and emergency response, creating a more comprehensive prevention system following the incident. These changes not only aim to protect current visitors, but also marked a turning point in risk management and emergency preparedness for disappearance situations in Yosemite, while giving victim families the sense that their stories were not forgotten and future victims would have better protection. After the trial concluded, Evan Colehart was transferred to ADX Florence, the federal maximum security facility, where he was strictly managed and continuously monitored, with no possibility of contact with the outside world, and all privileges maximally restricted to ensure safety and prevent recidivism risk. Liam Harper, after completing medical and psychological recovery procedures in Yosemite, was supported by family and psychologists to relocate to another state, where he changed his identity to protect personal safety and privacy, avoiding media and public contact. Along with the relocation, long-term support measures for mental recovery, PTSD therapy, and social reintegration were established, creating conditions for Liam to gradually regain independent living and control over his life after 5 years of detention. The investigation file related to the prolonged disappearances of Liam Harper and Daniel Brooks was officially closed, including all forensic data, evidence collected from the cabin and detention bunker, victim testimony, perpetrator movement schedules, and additional evidence from the P.O. box, camera traps, Daniel's GPS device, stored in the federal legal system, while providing a basis for tracking any related additional information in the future. The long-term impact of the case became evident. Daniel Brooks's family continued to face loss and emotional recovery. The hiking community and park management adjusted safety policies and hiking guidelines, while Liam Harper continued living in a protected environment with medical and psychological monitoring. The case also left lessons on secret detention methods in wilderness environments, forensic investigation combined with modern technical data, and post-rescue victim management. When all procedures were completed, the closed file marked the official end of a multi-year case involving disappearance, unlawful detention, coercive violence, and federal prosecution, while clarifying the perpetrator's responsibility and preventive measures to stop similar incidents in the future. The story of Liam Harper and Daniel Brooks in Yosemite National Park is a profound reminder of personal safety and the importance of thorough preparation when engaging in outdoor activities in the United States today. Through the details of Liam and Daniel disappearing on Mist Trail, then being detained for many years in an isolated area like Hetch Hetchy, we see that even experienced hikers can face risks without adequate precautions. The perpetrator choosing low tourist times and using rugged terrain like Mist Trail and Sunrise Creek to subdue and control victims highlights the importance of traveling in groups, maintaining frequent communication, and reporting detailed itineraries to family or park management. The next lesson drawn from Liam being forced to learn false statements and live in a sealed bunker is awareness of psychological risks and emergency response capabilities, while emphasizing the role of tracking devices and digital information like GPS, camera traps, and credit cards in locating and protecting oneself. Additionally, the story highlights the role of law enforcement and SAR as they coordinated to search, analyze data, and collect evidence systematically, thereby warning that preparation, coordination, and adherence to legal procedures are vital in emergencies. In modern life in the United States, this can be applied by always carrying backup communication devices, periodically updating location to family or companions, following national park safety guidelines, and recognizing that preparation involves not only hiking skills or essential gear, but also protecting oneself from potential risks in the environment and from surrounding people. This is clear evidence that caution, accurate information, and comprehensive preparation can save lives on trips into the wild. If you find the story of Liam Harper and Daniel Brooks offers valuable lessons, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other thrilling true crime stories. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video with a new case full of mystery and suspense.